Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now I'm out here today to test out the Crua Koala Full Kit. This is a shelter that's brand new to me. I have not yet taken this out of the package, but I do intend on bringing this on an upcoming backpacking trip. Now I'm here in this little pine grove to set this up for the first time. And if you're familiar with my channel, you probably realize that for me, before I bring a shelter system out into the backpacking or camping application, I do like to test it first in a controlled environment. Now there's a couple of reasons for that. So if you're not familiar with my channel, the main reasons why I like to test my kit in a controlled environment before I bring it out for the first time, well, first and foremost, even with the best manufacturing, sometimes things can go wrong. So I like to set my kit up and check it for the overall quality, check those critical stitches to make sure everything's put together exactly where I need it to. The last thing I want to find out as I go deep into the mountains, maybe I'm 6 or 8 miles deep, that there's a manufacturing problem with my shelter system. And equally important, sometimes even with the most simple of setups, there are little nuances, the things that you really want to know about your setup so that if you need the extra strap or the extra peg or tie out, you can bring it with you to make sure that your setup is optimum. And finally, it's that setup that actually is critical to having the overall safety that you need and also the comfort that you need. So setting up your shelter system and your sleep system in a controlled environment gives you that practice, the ability to set this up now in a controlled environment when later on, who knows what time you're going to show up at your camp. It could be raining out, it could be nighttime. There are going to be things about setting up your sleep system that you just absolutely want to know how to do it quickly and effectively. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to look at the Crua Outdoors Koala Full Setup, get it into some practice here, check it out, make sure everything's right where I need it to, and then in the future I'll be bringing this on an upcoming backpacking trip. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what I'm about to talk about, do me a favor. Stay tuned. So as I mentioned, I really do like to set up my shelter system and sleep system in a controlled environment for the first time. Now, on some of my prior videos, I have gotten a little bit of slack for doing this, and I think it's kind of funny. It's either the fact that people aren't paying attention to my overall purpose for the video, they just seem to be missing the overall intent. So again, pointing out that I am going to be testing all of my shelter systems first in the controlled environment. That's exactly what we're doing here today. So I'm in this little nice pine grove getting ready to set this up, and with that, let's get to work. So even though this is a little bit of a controlled environment, I do want to use good practices. Now I was considering setting up over there a little ways, and I realized that there was this big crazy leaning tree off in the distance here, and if I was not careful, that could potentially be the end of my day. Now, keeping in mind the fact that, I'm not going to be here long, I'm not sleeping here tonight, but I do want to generally use good camp practices to keep me safe. Anytime you're in the woods, you want to pay attention to your surroundings. So I've since moved over now. I do have these nice tall pines here. It is a windy day. There's a good amount of movement in the trees when the wind picks up. So I know that there's going to be a little bit of action here, but for the most part, I do feel pretty safe. And where I'm having my hammock set up, I'm basically going to pick a couple of trees here, maybe pick one of these from my long side and coming back over this way, pretty much getting myself established. So I think what I'm going to do is set myself up between a couple of these pines here, both to establish my ridge line for my tarp and also string out the hammock. So part of the idea about setting up my system in the controlled environment, especially with a hammock, getting that distance between trees. Every hammock is a little bit different. Every ridgeline is a little bit different. So as I set this up, I am paying attention to the overall distance of the trees. I'm gonna kind of keep that in mind. So when I get to my final destination in my campsite, I can kind of target that same sort of span between trees. So that's 18 feet there. I think that's a pretty good target. Seems to be just about the right distance. I know I have a 25-foot ridgeline for my tarp. That gives me a few feet around each one to kind of loop it around. So hopefully I'll have enough distance on my ridgeline at this point. Let's just go for it. So it's going to be a little bit hard for you to see, but at this point I do have my ridgeline tied up between the trees. Now I got the distance absolutely perfect. So at this point what I need to do is I have to take the tarp out and figure out how to get it connected to this ridgeline. Now I'm not that familiar with the tarp, so we're going to take a look at it here for the first time. So now getting a look at this tarp, you'll see it comes in this little stuff sack, which I may or may not use, not really too sure, but some stakes and the tarp. So the first thing I'm concerned with, oh that's nice, so they kind of have this pre-strung with all of your guy line and tie outs, so that's pretty cool. But the first thing I'm really concerned with is getting this tarp set up. So say for example, at least the worst case scenario, once I get a tarp set up, even if the weather was to change, I know I'm protected. So the first thing I typically do when I get to camp is work on my actual shelter piece. So the tarp here being what's going to keep me kind of dry or maybe sheltered from the wind a little bit. So I'm going to work on getting this tied to that ridge line. Now the main thing I'm looking for is the center tie outs. Again, I'm not that familiar with this, so as I open this up, I'm going to kind of figure out what's going on with it. I can definitely tell these are the end tie outs for sure. You can see here that there are some rivets here and actually through the webbing, so that's good. That helps to reinforce it. That's a good thing. And then the tie outs here, these corner ones seem to have little pockets, so I bet you these can kind of tuck in here when I go to put it away, which will be nice. Now this is seam sealed, so nice quality seam seal on the corners here. The only concern I think I have is this tie out does not seem to be necessarily reinforced in any kind of way. So hopefully for the long run this will be durable. But again, looking for those central tie outs here and the ridgeline tie outs, I kind of just need to open this up and see where I stand. All right, so now I have my tarp kind of strung out here, and as I mentioned, it is a very windy day. So perfect opportunity actually to test everything out and really give it a run in some tough conditions. I mean, not super tough, but when you're talking about wind like this, it is difficult to set up a tarp. And so that's one of the things I kind of want to mention. As we look at the end tie out here, you'll see that this does come pre-strung with some like nylon cord. Now personally, I will never use this for the ridgeline tie out. I believe that this will stretch and sag over time. I prefer to use Amsteel. Now I have put out videos in the past talking about how I pre-string and set up my tarp system, and that is exactly what I do. So on this side, you'll notice I've already gotten rid of that nylon, got it completely out of the way. I use these Amsteel prusik knots that really just loop on the end of the tarp. That allows me to get it really taut, and then if I want to slack it, I can easily slack the tarp. Now for me, basically what I would do is get this set up at home ahead of time and get this all configured, and then when I get to my campsite, all I need to do is basically get this strung around the trees, and I'm already partway into my shelter setup. And with that, one of the things I'd like to point out is that this does not have a center tie out, so you pretty much need to commit to sort of looping the tarp over the top of this. I do typically prefer, wow, look at these trees moving. A little bit of noise there. Got to pay attention to this. I do really prefer to have a central tie out here and get this kind of pre-strung ahead of time, but this is a little different design. So for me, the actual factory tie outs, at least in terms of the nylon, is simply not going to work. So I'm replacing that here with my Amsteel. All right, so at this point I do have the tarp strung up. Now it's not the tightest or most secure setup, but it will do for this demonstration and for my setup purposes. I do at this point have an understanding of the tarp. I do have an understanding of all the tie outs and the construction and what it's going to take to get this strung out to keep me dry and safe. So at this point, let's get a look at this tarp and cover it in a little more detail. So we've already talked about the end tie outs here. I am going with the Prussics, but you will also notice that there are some grommets. Now I tend to be careful with grommets with the idea that those can rip out, but what I do like to see is the fact that these are not just in the nylon, but they are actually through the webbing as well, so should be reasonably secure. Now that works well if you're going to do something to stake these down. I don't know if I would really put true tension on these or hard tension and really let the wind whip those around, especially where you have these loops here. Now on the ends and corners of the tarps, you don't have those grommets, but you do have these tie outs. So you'll see that it is kind of a double fabric here, but a little bit reinforced, but not like I've seen on other tarps. It seems to me like it should be suitable. Looks like it's well stitched overall, but I do have just a little bit of concern with it for the long haul. So we'll see how this performs. Now one thing that I do like is the fact that there are these little pockets here, so once you take your tie out and you bunch it up to put this away, you should be able to tuck it in that pocket there. Now I don't think you'll necessarily get any ponding of water inside there. It's nice and underneath the tarp, so unless you had a weird wind pushing the rain sideways, I don't think you'd get any buildup of water inside the pocket. But going along the edge of the tarp, you'll see that you have not only your corner tie outs, but also two midway down the tarp. Now that to me is a great opportunity to tie this out in a couple of different ways, and actually if you look at what I did on the other side of the tarp, you'll notice that my corner is actually tied out to the ground, but I wanted to gain some headspace, especially while I'm still setting up the hammock and I'm filming. So I was able to use one of the midpoint tie outs, get it strung around the tree here, just gives me a little more headroom so I can move around. But like I mentioned, I do like to look at these products for overall fabrication and the quality of the stitching, just in case things go wrong. Now for the most part, everything looks to be perfectly fine, but as you look right here, there is a piece of the fabric that's a little bit out of place. Now it's just a piece of the trim that wasn't folded over properly, and that's not a structural issue or anything I'm concerned with, but let's just say it was something different than that. Like I mentioned, I do want to really pay attention to these details in a controlled environment so I don't have problems when I'm out on the trails. Oh man, weather is turning a little bit here, so as I mentioned, imagine being down underneath that big tree right there. I mean, the last place I want to be is underneath that thing. This is sketchy enough right here. Definitely some branches dropping. But on these midpoint tie outs, you will see that they are reinforced. So as you look here, definitely reinforced, no problem. Actually, cool little feature with a little bit of Velcro here. Probably allows you to do a couple things. First, you could tuck these up in here when you're putting this away, or you could potentially maybe even roll up this tarp a little bit and get some of this fabric tucked away. I think the intentions of these little Velcro straps here is probably to help you manage your tie outs, but that's an interesting little feature. And in the front corner here, you'll see the Crua Outdoors logo. So you'll notice this comes in the color gray, which I like. I like a nice subdued color. I think I would actually advocate for Crua to start creating this system in their green. They do have a beautiful green color, which is very similar to their other shelters. I think that would be a nice addition, having not only this gray color, but also the green as well.